Welcome to C100 Global Wisdom Talks, the podcast where we explore transformative ideas and practical strategies for entrepreneurial families navigating the complex worlds of family wealth, family offices, and governance. Danny Kurtesh and Jan Petka are your guides on this journey as we uncover insights from the world's most brilliant minds and thought leaders shaping the future of intergenerational success. Before we dive in, let me introduce C100 Global, a peer network for entrepreneurial families and families of wealth. Our mission is to empower families to build meaningful legacies and become thriving 100-year families through a focus on dynamics, governance, and strategic collaboration. And now, let's start our conversation.
Welcome to the C100 Global Wisdom Talks. My name is Danny Curtis.
And I'm Jan Petka. I'm the co-founder of C100, and I'm the co-host of this series today. So today we are deeply honored that we can welcome James E. Hughes, I guess, or as he is formally known as J. Hughes, I guess, and to the show. And Jay is a global renowned figure in the field of family and family wealth, and also governance. He's author of groundbreaking books. I guess, Jay, you have written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books, and including Family Wealth, The Cycle of Gift, and he's a pioneer in the concept of viewing wealth as in a holistic journey towards of well-being, and not as just as a financial accumulation of money.
Jay has spent decades advising families on building thriving multi-generational legacies, and his philosophy has reshaped how families approach governance, purpose, and relationship. In this episode, we delve into the transformative idea that wealth is well-being and explore how families can redefine success across generations. Welcome, Jay. It's such a privilege to have you here today.
Well, Danny and John, it's my privilege, and I thank you so much for the invitation.
So, Jay, as a main starting point, can you share with our listeners and viewers how actually began your journey into families and also family wealth?
Yes, thank you. I am the son of a very successful international lawyer who was the head of a law firm in New York City for many, many years that had offices around the world. I grew up in a family in which my mother and father, both Depression-era people, really started their marriage with nothing. One grandfather had gone bankrupt. The other had gone to World War I, did not come back in good shape. So they committed themselves to the rebuilding of their financial selves, but much more to the question of growing family. This was the root and the core of their marriage. So I grew up in a family that was concentrated on the question of family in an interesting way. When I got out of law school and I was deciding what law to practice, I went into a department of the same law firm my father was leading called Trust and Estates. Today it's called Private Capital. And I went into that because I wanted to go to the firm where he was to learn who he was. That's the problem with fathers and sons, particularly successful fathers. So he ran the commercial department. There was a litigation department in Trust and Estates. That was it, just those three. So nepotism was already going on, so I didn't go in commercial. I didn't like litigation. So I went and I knew nothing about it whatsoever. Couldn't speak the language, which was foreign. And within 6 months, I realized I would have left the law and done something else, but for one very important thing. Young lawyers in the private client work have clients from day one. You have clients from day one. You have families you are serving from the first day you sit in your seat. I found them fascinating. I think in a different time or a different lifetime, I would have been a social anthropologist, or maybe an evolutionary psychologist. But in this lifetime, I found my way into those fields through the gift of the families that they were giving me by giving me the opportunity to serve them. I've never looked back. That has been the one consistent thing I would say of my professional and personal life is fascination with how families function or don't.
That's great.
When was the point in your career when you changed your views about being just the expert in the picture, just the lawyer? Let's put it in brackets.
Danny, thank you. That's a great question. I'm glad to share. At the age of 49, right on time, as Dante's poem said, I found myself in midlife, 49, in a dark wood, a very dark place, and no way out. And I had to sit there for a while. Midlife crises can be incredibly powerful. Mine was a great one, which meant it was really deep and very dark. About halfway through that process, I began to realize that where there were issues in my private life, there were issues in my professional life. The issues in my professional life were this problem that I could not see how I had helped the families I served, even though I had, with a very hubristic view, a huge international following. I was going all over the world. It was a lot of fun, lots of fancy dinners and nice things. But in my heart, I knew I wasn't helping. So I had to sit there and feel my way, not think my way through that question. And one day, great day, I would say, and for me, was I woke up and realized that I'd been asking the wrong question. Experts ask, what do you need? And that is in advertising jargon, you're a needy person, I have the answer. This is terribly, terribly troubling. Of course, you don't have the answer. You have an answer as an expert, but you don't have the answer. You might be a little fox, as Isaiah Bourne said, but you're not a hedgehog. you don't have the answer to that question.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, wait a minute. Suppose I asked a different question with intention, not just a different question, but with intention, open heart, open mind. How can I help? Understanding I might not be able to help. That was no reason why they needed my help. From that day on, my life has changed. Never again asking someone, what do you need? From the expert perspective, I have the answer. To this open heart, open mind, what the Buddha calls the beginner's mind, can I help, has changed my life profoundly. And I believe it has changed my ability to help families. But I want to say again, it comes from a place where you do not know if you can help. The expert knows he can help. The beginner's mind does not know if he can help at all.
So, Jay, that's quite fascinating, and I want to success. Let's deep a little bit deeper into this topic, wealth as well-being. And I guess you're following my thoughts if I expressed it clearly that there is an illusion what wealth actually is and what does actually mean. Because most of these wealthy individuals or also wealthy families think that is only and only the money. So can you give us just the bird perspective on regards what is actually well-being and what is just the direction between well-being and wealth?
Well, let's start with etymology. That's a big word. What do words mean? That's what etymology is about. Another of my stories is that I spent 30 years, gentlemen, trying to find a better word than wealth to describe what I thought families consisted of, what capitals they consisted of. Hmm. So finally, about 4 years ago, I opened a dictionary, which sits right next to me, that belonged to my aunt, who was a poet and a librarian, very interesting humanist. And I looked to say, well, what does the word wealth mean? Duh, well-being. The Anglo-Saxons, our common German and English language, interestingly this morning, uh, says weal, W-E-O, weals. And you hear this word in commonweal and commonwealth. We use it all the time. What does it mean, well-being? That is all it has ever meant. So we have taken a word in modernity of immense importance. Wealth is well-being, it lifts us up. It takes us to high places of spiritual aspiration, to common desire to make good decisions. We've dumbed it down in an economic, scientific world when we're dealing with family, which is a social phenomena with human beings making them up. So we start at the wrong place. If we think of wealth as economic, we're not thinking about the family. We're thinking about capital intermediation. Fine, that's a good business. It's not the family's business. The family's business is its well-being, its capacity for each member to have a good life. So when you look at wealth as well-being, what it brings into your consciousness immediately is, well, what do we consist of? And this question of well-being you asked, yeah. Well, first, are the human beings thriving? Oh, that's a really good place to start. And is their well-being our concern? Well, what are we learning about that? What are we sharing about what we learn about each other and what we learn together? Are we making good decisions together as a result of thriving, thoughtful people? And then do we have an aspiration that our family will flourish for 5 generations? This is well-being. How much more interesting these questions are than the economic questions are. Now, I'm not denying that an early generation of the family may have been consumed by economics, generativity, energy to matter. Okay. But how about G2 and G5? Are they consumed by economic? No, they're consumed by social questions. How am I doing? How are we doing? Are we learning together? Are we making great decisions together? Are we aspiring together to reach our 5th generation? Those are the wealth as well-being questions.
That is fascinating.
There are so many questions that I could ask, but I'm trying to keep on topic a bit here in terms of the well-being. I mean, you obviously work with a lot of families, and usually the financial or legal issues come in place first. How do you approach these families with these ideas of wealth being about well-being? And adding to that, including not only the principal or maybe his spouse, his wife, husband, but also the kids and the next generations, looking into the future, not focusing only on the financial.
Well, let me start by saying something that I think those who are kindly taking their time and treasure to listen to us this morning, let me say something that is foundational. Families are affinity groups, A-F-F-I-N-I-T-Y. What does the word affinity mean? The word affinity means positive human connections other than by blood. Now, I'm going to say something many in the audience will be amazed. There is no family of blood and never has been one since the beginning of time. All families begin with 2 people who have an affinity. That's the absolutely bedrock of reality. So if you're focused on economics, more or less, you can fall into the fallacy that your blood is better than your neighbor's. And that's death. Mother Nature wins the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves or noble to stable boy proverb every time when you fall into that trap. No, families begin with two people who have an affinity. Oh my goodness, what did he say? Huh. That's the chemistry. That's the energy. That's what makes the matter of family from two people who have energy. You feel that? That's affinity. You grow affinity. Do you grow affinity with your financial manipulation? No, you don't. Bankers are thrilled if you have that mentality, but it's not good for you. It's not bad to be a good, careful saver and be frugal and all the right things that all the different traditions teach us are necessary for a good life. But the core question for family is affinity. And are we growing it? Do we like each other? Oh my goodness. And are we seriously committed to enhancing each other's lives? In the books that Jan was kindly to mention that I've written, there's one theme in every book that never will go away. The purpose of family is to enhance each other's journeys of happiness. Of course, there's no spiritual tradition or intellectual tradition that does not come to that ground, right? The purpose of life is to enhance each other's journeys. Remember, we're gregarious species. We are herd species. We're not individual people who can live the day they're born. No, we're a herd species. And so our interest in affinity, I express as, am I interested in enhancing your life? Not at the expense of mine. And now I'll tell a great truth. I'm selfish because if I enhance your life, I hope you'll enhance mine. Oh, that's subtle. Of course we're selfish. But how can we be most successful selfishly? Can we find others who will help us? Why? No one's going to help us if we're not helping them. There's a deep reciprocity, and the affinity is the beautiful positive word of connection. So it's saying, I don't feel diminished by helping you enhance your life. I feel increased by it personally. That's affinity. So the basic chemistry and the basic capital of a family is its affinity. And is it working actively to grow it? Is it telling its stories? Is it having gatherings? Is it doing things together that enhance each other's lives? But I want to say it one more time. Blood is death. As a great demographer friend of mine said, the only thing blood is good for is if you are in the emergency room hemorrhaging and there's somebody by good chance who has one of your types. Otherwise, he said, pay no attention to it. He was absolutely right.
So, Jay, that's purely resonates to me and to us. Is just I would add just the question if we can make this a little bit more concrete, and if there's just one opportunity that you can open the door for us and also for the viewers. On the one hand, I'm totally with you. A family that are coming together as a tribe by choice, not by blood, right? That is just in I would say it's a noble goal, and it should be achieved by every family around the globe. But if we can talk about a little bit, if a family decide, okay, we come to this conclusion, wealth is just more than money. And they put aside just the money and say, we have enough of this, and it's just our great vehicle. And we as a family will concentrate on this qualitative capital. From your experience, what are the biggest challenges these families are facing if they want to approach these qualitative capital forms?
Well, Jan and Donnie, quite some years ago, I was in a huge conference room in New York City in a men's club, coffered ceilings, 200 quants were there. And I was supposed to talk to them about the qualitative. I was so scared. 3 days one day, 2 days before, I didn't know what to say. So I thought, what can I offer these people? It's a quant conference, and a friend of mine said, would you come? And in a loose moment, I said yes, and now I was regretting this yes. So I got up in front of these people, and my spirit guides decided to be helpful that morning because I was in bad shape. I needed some help. So I asked them to close their eyes. You could hear the ground roll, growls, close the eyes. What meditation? Oh dear, what's going on there? And I said, would you close your eyes, take some breaths? And by the way, I begin every talk, not this one today on purpose, but almost every talk of this with this meditation so people can understand where I'm coming from. To the question you're asking, what is the consciousness of a family that wants to be a flourishing family? So I asked them to bring into their consciousnesses the most beautiful place they go when they're supremely happy, and sit there and experience the smells, the sounds, the beauty. Look at the Matterhorn as we're experiencing. It's magnificent this morning. And then I asked them very gently to bring into their consciousness, this is consciousness, the people on the earth they love the most, and have them come and sit there with them and experience a special place. And then, as we are completing that consciousness, I ask them, this is your wealth. No one goes away from that little meditation. It's not Jay helping them, it's them helping themselves, because never again can they say consciously, I don't know what my wealth is. They can go back to worrying about money, they can go back to worrying about, but they can't say again, ever again, my wealth is my money. It isn't. They have consciously brought into their person, their spirit, what their wealth is, their family, the people they love the most, these magnificent places on the earth that they can be. This is a consciousness question. And what I would have to say is that if the consciousness of a family, this affinity, this aspirational aspect to grow together, to enhance each other's lives, if it's not present, then gradually over 3 generations, as Mother Nature says, inertia, the physics principle of inertia, cold, 2 bodies resting next to each other with no connection, will win out. That's not a bad thing, by the way. It's a perfectly natural thing. But it's awfully unpleasant and unnecessary. But unless the consciousness of the family is that it is itself, this thing, this tribe, this place, the stories, the uniqueness, but differentness. I don't like uniqueness, but I think differentness is a good word. That's a consciousness question, isn't it? It's a spiritual question. It's an aspirational question that inspires us. If this isn't present, stop, do something else. But if you really care about this thing called family and its long possibilities of constantly enhancing the lives of people, then start consciously with what your wealth is, this people and this place, and your differentness as you go forward with that process. But if the consciousness, as that room that morning where I was so scared, so uncomfortable, but what was so interesting, I might say, at the end of that talk, a very dear friend of mine was in a back row, and she was sitting next to an old man who was a real quant, real serious quant. And at the end of the 45 minutes, I got the best gift I could have gotten. He turned to her and she told me the story of it and said, I want to have a drink with that guy. That was the best comment I think I ever had in my life. But it's consciousness, guys. I'm not being woolly here. This is tough stuff. This is very, very basic stuff. Where do you start? You know, when Lao Tzu said the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, he didn't just say step, he said the first right step, and he didn't mean right or left foot. he meant the right view of the question. So we're going to start a journey of 1,000 miles, five generations of your family and more. What is that first step consciously doing? What are you consciously doing? My wealth will be these people and their well-beings and society's well-being in turn, by the way. It's not just your family. If you have a flourishing family, as Aristotle said, you'll have a flourishing society. By the way, if you don't have flourishing families, that's a question for our times. Can you have a flourishing society? Oh, that's a hugely important question. Maybe for another day's interview, but boy, that's enormous. Aristotle was very clear. You can't have a flourishing society if the families make it up are not flourishing themselves. That's something to think about. When we complain about politics, look inside first. Remember the biblical statement, if you see the other guy and he's got a little tiny thing in his eye, pay attention to the 4x4 in your own first.
Yes.
Oh, oh.
Can I ask you? I mean, I guess we've all been in a situation where you talk to a principal or the principal generation or the elder generation, and they feel unappreciated by the next generation. And they're saying, I'm doing actually everything for my family. They just don't understand. And if you talk to the next generation, the younger, the rising generation, they say, well, that's just not true. They never asked us what we really want.
Yeah.
So what is your experience with this kind of discussion that many of us probably had?
Well, this is, of course, very human and very common because it's human. I would say, Danny, that one of the things that families can do when they meet with each other, which you've just described a meeting, feelings, confidence, is ask themselves before they speak and before they exercise what I will call illusion, which this conversation is now an illusion on both parties. What stage of life is Dad in? And how is Dad doing with the core questions that all human beings know about because we read about them and we feel them? So when our friends Erickson or Maslow or my new book I published in my foundation, 10 by 10, reminds us that all of us are in some stage of life as we move through. So I'm in the 8th stage. I'm in the but one oldest stage at 82. I have entirely different questions than I had at 72. And absolutely different ones than I had when I was in that dark wood. So if we ask ourselves first, Dad or Mom, more often Dad, I would say, ask themselves, well, what are the actual questions I have? Not what do my kids think or what they're doing, but what are my questions? Am I working on them? And by the way, one of the questions of the late stage of life is, how is my life in an integrated sense of all the stories that I am? And I'm becoming a storyteller in a good way. Am I curious about the others rather than only curious about myself? Because when you get to this late stage, you're curious about lots of things. To some extent, to identify this and not be woolly about it, one of the gifts to families that Winston Churchill offered is those who can see furthest back can see furthest forward. Oh, well, what's my job here? Is my job here to cling to power and money? Oh dear, that might not be a good death. Or is my job to look back and see all the mentors I had? How I got here? What was life like when I was a boy? Oh, the children would love to know that. By the way, the most interesting question when grandfathers get together with grandchildren at family meetings, what do the grandchildren want to know about Grandpa? Was he ever 10 years old? Of course they do. Of course they do. They don't want to know how many companies you're running. Yes, it's nice to visit and to see a building you built. Yeah, fine. I'm not diminishing it. But what they really want to know, were you ever 10 years old? Who were you? Who are you? Oh, those are the right questions. And each stage of life has different questions, doesn't it? So when we meet each other, one of the wonderful things to ground us is to look at each other and say, gosh, what stage of life is Danny in? What stage of life is Jan in? What stage of life is Jay in? Because I can probably have a really good conversation with him if I indicate to him that I understand he's likely to have a certain set of questions. See how human this is? By the way, if I could use this question to add one more thing, no family can be successful if it isn't growing elders. No human community can be successful if it's not growing elders. Churchill's great statement, those who can see furthest back, is a statement from an elder, isn't it? It's wisdom. It's not saying he got that looking back or forward, you got the right answer. It's saying you know something that you can exchange with what you saw and what you will see. Elders are critically important to family well-being. And by the way, societal well-being. We say again, flourishing families make up flourishing societies. Flourishing families cannot function if they're not growing elders. And societies cannot function if they're not growing elders. I would argue, without making a political statement, that we're living in a time of the world where we're short of elders. That's a very important question, isn't it? Could we learn in a societal sense, from our families? Yes, we could.
I mean,
so this. Let me just. I'm sorry. You go ahead, Jan. Go ahead.
No problem. So what in my head pops up is what you mentioned. This wisdom is. I read a sentence in an exceptional book. It's called The $100 Trillion Wealth Transfer. And the author, Ken Costa, was written clearly that you can't, and I will repeat, you can't Google wisdom, right? And so therefore, it is quite crucial, and I'm totally with you, that we support families in regards of, I guess you have created also this term, the eldership, right? That we have access to this kind of wisdom and motivate these elders to transfer their wisdom into the younger generation. And in regards of this, I have just a great example. Just a couple of days ago, a guy approached me with a great title on his email footer, and he called himself a trusted advisor. And I was asking him, can you tell me a little bit more? Why do you call yourself as a trusted advisor? Because you can't describe yourself as a trusted advisor. I mean, if you serve a family, the family can describe you just as a trusted advisor. And I will bring this question a little bit in front of you, not in regards of the trusted advisor, just as in function for the family. I would call it just as a co-pilot, the personne de confiance. And why is it, from your experience, is this great number two, what you often describe, so crucial and so requested in this complex times for families, and also in the future? I mean, there will be not in decrease of complexity in the families, because the family from the past will be potentially nothing to do with the family in the future. So therefore, it could be a great asset that each of these families have access to a personne de confiance as a co-pilot, also potentially as a beacon for the family itself. Can Can you describe this for us? Just what is actually the role of the personne de confiance, and why is this role so crucial and so important for the family?
Jan, let me start with a historical perspective. Our great ancestors, the Romans, who underlie our Western civilization, by the way, the Chinese history is replete with the same question. If we are on a 5-generation journey, so that's about 150 years for the third generation to be born and die before we know how we're doing. In that first 150 years, we will have many interregnums between reigns. This Latin is very, very helpful, and we still use it. So all of history, when we're looking at long-term family systems, which the dynasties were, whether they were Chinese or Western, we know that there are times when the king is too young, the queen is too old, the prince is far away, Richard the Lionheart being captured by the Austrian king, or something is in the system is stuck. So there are all through human, remember, these are human systems. They're not business systems, they're human systems. We know that there will be too young, too old, away, whatever the problem may be. What happens in these times is what we call regency. Regency is the answer for those times in those families when there is a void. And voids are terribly risky, aren't they? All kinds of things can enter the system if the system is not, as Nassim Taleb said, anti-fragile, that has real endurance. Even its resilience, it's not strong enough. It's got to be enduring. Those are terribly risky times. Regents have good histories and bad histories. Does the regent want to be the king? Or does the regent care that the 8-year-old reaches 15 and can be inaugurated? This is, again, a question of consciousness, like everything else we're discussing this morning. There are certain people, if we can find them or grow them, who care tremendously that the system survives and thrives in those moments of difficulty. Now, the other way you know that the king or queen is preparing, this is the personne de confiance, is in history who slept not in the king or queen's bed, the stranger, but below the bed just at the last door, the personne de confiance. Oh, I see what Mr. Hughes is talking about, or Jay is talking about. The Vikings do come, don't they? Yeah, they come. They come. The Goths come. The Visigoths come. The Huns come. They come. The Mongols come. They come. Are we ready? Who stands ready at that moment? So this is a question of calling, in my opinion. Vocare, the question of true vocation is, there are professionals who, by the way, I think like me, not me, please don't hear this as a J, but who wake up to this question of can I help rather than what do you need? And are somewhat consumed by it in a good way. Their own growth, their own spiritual growth depends upon taking that path, the lesser path, the more difficult path of help rather than need. So personnes de confiance are the people we need. I use that word very carefully, or desire might be even better, to help us through the discontinuities, through those moments of risk. We don't need them so much when things are going well, but we really benefit from them when things are getting shaky. Who cares? And by the way, another part of the personne de confiance is they're fascinated by the question that one of my clients is fascinated with. Can you grow in a family a culture of care? Oh, is that an interesting question? Care is one of those funny words where you could be 3-year-old and have a fall and you need a Band-Aid over your owie. That's caring. Or do you get to this level of care where you'd like to be a fifth generation family? Do you really care? Look at the word care. And then if you do care, will you care in terms of practice so that the culture of care is what you're instilling into your system? Because then you're going to enhance each other's lives. You see the progression? But if you don't have a culture of care, it isn't that you don't care about something, you just don't care about this problem. It's not suggesting that you don't have things you care about. No, it's, do you care about having a fifth generation family? Does that matter to you? Now, one other thing in this that comes to mind too is there's an old saying in our field, you only know you'll have a family when mother dies. Absolutely true, by the way, absolutely true. So bringing mother in, because we had father to some extent before in the question about, well, you don't care about me, you're no, et cetera, et cetera. Mother has a very interesting role here because she does represent care. Now, here's something that the audience might enjoy. In every tradition, including certain parts of Christianity, but very profoundly in all other religious traditions, a woman's full development is to become wisdom, and a man's full development is to become compassion. Only in part of Western Christianity did we miss this. But all the rest of the traditions see the female path as becoming wisdom and the male path. And now think about the father that we were talking about before. If he wants to become what a male is meant to be, how does he express compassion in the 8th stage of life? Oh, is that important? I know that. I speak from my everyday experience. The mother's role is wisdom. So when she dies, we're in trouble. So how does mother's energy, committed to this fifth generation and going on from there, we need to listen to her wisdom.
Right.
We need to understand when she's fully herself, what she leaves us as her gift.
As a family member, as a entrepreneurial family of wealth, you said before,
family of financial capital.
Of financial capital, sorry.
No money.
Sorry, Jay.
No. I'm only doing this, Downey, for fun because, by the way, this is the critical question consciously. When a family can say to each other, we're going to talk about economics and financial capital, they're telling each other, by the way, we're not discussing spiritual, social, intellectual, and human capital right now. All the capitals, all the actual well-being of the family comes into that consciousness. That's the reason I stopped you. It's huge if you can change your speech.
No, absolutely. And I want to just pick up this thought because it crosses exactly the moment where the quest for a personne de confiance starts.
Right. Yes. What am I looking for?
What am I looking for? Exactly.
Right.
Now, these moments where you consciously find out that there is more than financial capital in the family is very often in times of changes, in times of intergenerational change.
Discontinuity. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Like these times of.
Yes.
Now, how can you, from your experience working with families, what I see is there is a huge issue to find this person, the confiance, in a matter of in a short time, because as you said before, if you don't have problems, you don't envision problems. You don't want to think about what can go wrong.
Right.
So, but when you're there, it's often too late because conflict starts or discussions start that go in the wrong direction or come from a bad place where you never discussed before. So how can you help families early enough to make them conscious about this?
Well, let me say in a big way, to give some names that people couldn't say, When Bismarck emerged in Germany, there was a need for unity, for discovering, are we a people? When Metternich came, it was because Napoleon had destroyed Europe, but he came. These are two names for our European listeners that they would immediately understand. So I'm looking at a big social, but what I'm trying to give you a sense of who these kinds of people are. Danny, I don't know because it's a mystery how you find these people or where they show up. What I can say is that we have two stories that I can offer, one very ancient and one modern, that might help people. In Dante's great poem, remember I said before I found myself in Dante's dark wood in midlife with no way out. How does the poem begin? The poem begins after he recognizes where he is. So you just said one thing very important. Do you know where you are? And do you know, like the pilot, you're in an area you don't know, you got to get back to where it's something you know. So that's the first thing. Do you know that the stress is real, not contrated, and that you're in real risk? So what does Dante do? He brings Virgil to life, remember? He's a great poet, so he says, I need to bring somebody to help me here. So he brings Virgil to life in the poem, and then they have two books together. Virgil is the person de confiance for Dante. We have the whole story right there. And it's a magnificent story of buddies. It's a funny way to put it, like a buddy movie. But Virgil is anything but a buddy. He is a person de confiance for Dante and for all of us as we take Dante's journey. Now, to give you a more practical point of view, we had a basketball player here in New York, in America, named Bill Bradley, who was at Princeton when I was there. I got to watch him play, which was an extraordinary thing. He was the best basketball player, a man in space I've ever seen, just extraordinary. He was asked one day, Bill, why are you such a good basketball player? And he said, I have to tell you, if you're 6'5" and you've got good athletic skills, you probably could be a pretty good player. But he said, I got a gift of peripheral vision that others don't have. I see more of the court. Oh, that's really interesting. He said, yes. So he said, if you have good height and good skills, then you should be a good basketball player. That hit me that day because I thought, well, it isn't just that he's seeing more of the court, he's seeing more of the system. So what I've said to clients for years, Danny, when they've asked me that question, I've said, who's sitting right by your shoulder you can't see? Can you expand your peripheral vision? Because I promise you that person's waiting to join your life. But you have to call them in. So if you can expand isn't that a wonderful image? You expand your peripheral vision to be able to see a little bit past your shoulders. Person's right there. But you have to call them in. So you have to believe that you want that person to come and help you. Just like Dante did. He said, I'm cooked. I'm cooked. I can't get out of here. But it isn't maybe that profound a realization, but you have to believe that you really want someone to come into your life to help you in this interregnum, in this area of stress, in this time of transition. By the way, let me say this. Never ask someone to come help you with succession. It's a cutting word. All life is linked transitions. All families that do well get rid of succession. They never use the word. They see themselves as linked transitions. That opens up your peripheral vision.
Yes, that's a nice way to look at things. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that brings in my head what you've written up in your book, Family Wealth, and I clearly underscore this, that we need a change of our vocabulary.
Yes. Yes, we do.
We should definitely change, for example, next generation, who is just the next generation. We we should call it's a raising generation.
Yes.
Because if you change the words, you change the awareness, and then if you have changed the awareness, there are different outputs, if you want. So let me summarize our call for today before I come to our final question, what we want to ask each of our attendees. It is quite important that I mean, what I see in many cases and in each discussions, there is a huge illusion what wealth actually is and means, right? And we should focus on, yes, financial capital, it is still there. But it is useless if you forget your intellectual capital, if you forget your social capital, if you forget your human capital, if you forget, I mean, we as German and European hate a little bit these what spiritual, I will call as a legacy capital. Because that is at the end of the day your house, what you're growing up and what you're building up, right? And if you're only focused on your financial capital, I mean, in the end of the day, your family will be gone. So our final question for today, Jay, can you imagine, and please allow me and us, that we take you just on a little journey? I and we would like to make an appointment with you again for today in exactly 500 years. What is your projection on a society, on families, and on the topic of wealth?
Assuming post the coming, what is the word that there be not synchronicity, but the coming point where human beings are outthought by machines, singularity. If we have human beings in 500 years, I think we will. It will be because we have resolved a question asked by a wonderful British philosopher in 1954. Have the humanists and the scientists found a common vocabulary? The great problem of our times is the humanists have been overwhelmed by the scientists. Now, that is not to say that life hasn't been magnificently extended by science, that abundance is present that's never been present. I am not anti-science. I am pro-humanist. So if we went back 500 years, a little further, to Erasmus sitting in Amsterdam with his funny hat, asking, where are the texts? I'm reading this book by Aristotle, but I don't think this is what he said. So what did Erasmus do? He began to write to the Arabs. He wrote to the Byzantines. He said, do you have any texts? Do you have any books about what these people actually said? And he got books. He got to read them. And he became the beginning of humanism in the modern sense. But we've had humanists all the way back, China, India, the West. Of course we have. So the great question that it would interest me 500 years from now is, how are the humanists and the scientists talking to each other? Science will continue. Of course it will. Life will extend. But here's one of the questions I'm going to be fascinated by. We're moving into a time for the family where 1.2 babies per mom will be the actual reality all the way. Now, that means, by the way, extinction 500 years from now. You get down, you need 2.1, remember, to replace the family, to replace the parents. So if you live at 1.2 forever, you go extinct, just like any other life form. So one of the great questions we're going to face in the next 100 years, and then let's say the 400 after that, is what does family look like when the mothers produce not enough children to actually replace the species. Again, can the humanists talk to the scientists? Can we develop systems for the family in this new form it's going to be in? And science assisted. So I would finish by saying this. The Greek tradition, the Chinese, by the way, as well, so we take those two forming sets of ideas that we have books to read. Obviously, there were people before history who had great ideas. We just don't have the benefit of. Both of them saw that there were two kinds of philosophy. Moral philosophy, what it is to be human, and natural philosophy, how does the world work? That beautiful painting by Raphael, using images that I think the audience will know, shows Plato looking up and Aristotle looking down. Plato is saying, oh, up to ideas, and Aristotle is saying, what's going on the ground? That wonderful painting of those two men. This difference between moral philosophy and natural philosophy, the Greeks were very, very clear, and the Chinese as well. Moral philosophy, what is it to be human, trumps natural philosophy, science. Science is techne, how does it work? Net moral philosophy is who are we? Why are we here? What are the great questions of our lives? So I'm hoping 500 years from now, there will still be that conversation going on. And I'm hoping that the human beings at that time will recognize the moral philosophy questions trump the natural philosophy questions. Because I think the risk, as C.P. Snow saw it, of the humanists and the scientists not being able to speak to each other is where we are now, which is an intellectual trap. Science trumps. You see the problem?
Mm.
This is unnatural. This violates all of the basic rules of where things are dominant and subservient. So, gentlemen, I would say to the families, we are about a social question that has economic consequences. We are not about an economic conversation which has social. That's where we are now, and it's hugely dangerous. But it isn't necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. I mean, it's been a blessing and a privilege to talk to you, to learn from you, and we hope to move on to the next couple of conversations that are planned. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
Blessings on every family who's joined us, Jan and Danny. Blessings on their journeys. And may the human questions be the core ones, and the scientific questions help. Thank you so much.
Many, many thanks, Jay, for your time and for this inspirational content. We will see you soon.
Bye, gentlemen.
Thank you for tuning in to C100 Global Wisdom Talks. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit. For more resources and insights, visit www.c100global.com.